Hi everybody, Tim Emerson of Kuan Yin Healing, and I want to talk to you today about leaving your comfort zone, facing your fears, and why it's important to do that. In fact, it's essential. The best way of summing this up is to look at Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, which a lot of people talk at mainly as a template for doing stories and movies, but it's much, much more than that. Campbell very carefully studied and noticed not only myths and cultures, but people's dreams and psychoanalysts follow this pattern. We go through the same concerns over and over again. Because the hero's journey is about our consistent patterns. It's about potential that we buried in childhood. We all say, you look at children, they're so free, they're so happy. And why wouldn't it be, right? Everything is provided. Mom and dad are in charge of everything. Life is grand. That is how we're supposed to be. The only thing is that as an adult, we have to move from being given that to earning it. So it's the hero's journey is a process of really, dying as a failed human and being reborn as the universal eternal people that we are, assisted with gifts and knowledge along the way. This is going to shatter our old forms and attachments, but it also is going to bring us an inexhaustible joy. It is our natural state to be happy and be free. My friend Louise just came back from Africa, and they're so happy there. I mean, they don't have these worries. So that's what we want to talk about here. Okay. Now, the successful hero's adventure is about unlocking that flow. Okay. We feel stuck, right? Why doesn't things just flowing for me? Why don't they just work? And we want to increase that into the physical realm, not escape it. I want to bring this stuff into my daily life. This process of continuous creation, okay? It's an initiation. It's a path to awareness. So the first thing we need to do is realize that, first of all, inside the comfort zone, nothing is ever going to happen. It's status quo. We tend to say, well, I don't know if I'm comfortable with that. Whoa, that's a major problem, okay? Every time we stay with things that are comfortable, we're going to always stay where we are. And that's not realistic. It would be like one of these trees saying, I'm tired of growing, I'm just going to stay here. You can't do it. If we don't take this journey, all we're going to do is run into a series of disruptions. So it's really, really crucial that we do that. The other thing is that facing our fears come from us. Okay? These are our own blocks to what should be happening for us. Let's take a look at how this works. So, the hero's journey starts with a call to adventure. Everybody talks about this first part. You probably recognize several of these things. The hero is in the ordinary world, and suddenly this unexpected world comes up, right? When we're kids, our parents are the threshold guardians. But the hero or the heroine is growing up, and suddenly these desires come up, unrecognized, unknowing, undeveloped. Okay? We get glimpses. So some common examples, like Harry Potter, right? Living in this ordinary world covered under the stairs. It's not great, but it's not horrible. It's the world he knows. He's comfortable. Luke Skywalker, living on a sandy planet with his aunt and uncle, and he's bored, but things are okay, right? The Hobbit, Bilbo Baggins is enjoying this comfortable, steady, serene life, and until these things come into action, right? I love the example of the Hobbit too, because as Gandalf says, this is not some adventure that superhuman heroes and heroines go in, but rather, as Gandalf said, it's the actions of little people that make the real difference. Okay, and so something happens, right? Harry gets all these letters from Hogwarts. Luke gets this message for Princess Leia. Help me, Obi-Wan, you're my only hope. Gandalf shows up with all these dwarves, right? And what does our hero do? The very first thing our hero does is refuse the call, right? You got the wrong person. No, Luke goes home. Harry gives up on the idea of Hogwarts, and Bilbo's glad to see the dwarves go. That's it. He fails to make the passage because there are consequences for leaving home. And as the Truman Show says, right, we accept the reality of the world we're presented with, even if it doesn't work. So we have to step out of that. We tend to justify the status quo. We call it acceptance. We call it being realistic. It's actually a rejection of ourselves. So how do we get out of that? Something new comes along. In the movies, it's supernatural aid. It's a gift. Luke, your dad was a Jedi. Here's his lightsaber. Harry, Hagrid shows up, right? Harry, you're a wizard. Haven't you ever had strange things happen? Or a fairy godmother shows up. Or in the myth, sometimes it's very much a trickster who lures us in, right? The myth of Thor, or the movie, as I saw the movie, Loki essentially tricks him into his world of trials. But whatever it is, finally, the hero accepts the call and crosses the threshold. Now, this is as far as people usually take this, but this is really where everything starts. Because as soon as we cross the threshold, we're now in this magic zone. Campbell actually calls this crossing of the first threshold. So this is really crucial. This is a zone of magnified power because two things just happened. One is we've left the status quo. Things that weren't possible are now possible. Okay? It's a magic realm, if you will. And things that used to be the status quo and calm and stable fixed forms are shattered. They're gone. They're malleable. For things to change, things have to change. And that's the first thing to understand. If you want something different has to happen. So we walk into this, and our first reaction is resistance. It's pain, right? Because our old world is smashed. But this is what makes the magic possible. This is what makes new lives possible. When things are falling apart, they're falling into place. So the next part of Campbell's model is the belly of the whale, which he describes as self-annihilation. So these blockages that we see around us, okay, the things that are keeping stuck, the reasons we can't do the things we want to do, are totally inside. That's a hard thing to see. It's a hard lesson to learn. But they are totally inner things. The best example by far of this is the Buddha, who, when he finally left a life of asceticism and trying many different paths, sat under the Bodhi tree, resolved to stay there. And he faced all kinds of trials. But the very last one was when Mara appeared to him as his own ego. His last and most difficult trial was facing his own ego. And Buddha says, architect, we met at last. And Mara challenges him, if you do this thing, if you reach enlightenment, who will witness it? And the genius of that moment is Buddha completely relinquishing ego, saying, the earth is my witness, and touches the earth and becomes enlightened. Okay, that's the path. The path of initiation, the path to awareness, the path to freedom from fear, and I mean that literally, freedom from fear, okay, is a path of ascension and rising vibration, which is why I've paired this with the reconnection, which raises our vibration very quickly, and a bunch of other energy work. So what happens next, once we've done this initial work, is we begin the road of trials. Now that doesn't sound very inviting, but the road of trials is exactly this. We discover our opposite, our own unsuspected selves. Once we're finally being honest with ourselves, we see the shadow. And once we find that unsuspecting self, we can assimilate it. Those demons that we encounter, we create them. They're our shadow selves. Once we recognize that these are our demons, we can absorb them and transform them. So Campbell calls this the deepening of the first threshold. Okay, in virtually every tradition, everyone I can think of initiation, asks, can the ego put itself to death? There's a symbolic dying, this letting go of this. My Why We're Getting Stuck video addresses this in more practical and less mystical terms, if that helps. Okay, so as we do this, this becomes not a mystical, spiritual journey in the sense we usually think of that, but it becomes very real and very practical. Because normally we are dissipating in tremendous amounts of energy, okay? Instead, we start to focus this energy. I like to compare this to the metaphor of climbing a mountain. If I just walked into the wilderness aimlessly, I'd be dead in a few days. If I follow an established path, I'm on a better track. And so this is the next thing that's presented, actually. Campbell talks about the meeting with the goddess, coming face to face with what is with Mother Nature, essentially. She is good. She is beautiful. Okay, she is awesome. She's providing, and Mother Nature is also harsh and vicious and uncaring. You know, my wilderness trek into the Dix Mountain Wilderness, I was keenly aware the whole time, and not a little bit afraid, that if I make one mistake, I die here. You know, and nature doesn't even care. So we start to understand this harmonization of opposites, not just in assimilating our shadow selves, our fears, but also understanding that this is how the world works. Like Taoism, the first thing that happens, split into yin and yang, creation of the 10,000 things. And we don't hold bitterness towards Mother Nature for being that way. We appreciate that total package as what is. Okay? At the same time, then once we start to walk into this beauty, we understand what Campbell calls the luminous temptress, which is we've been kind of lured in, right? Like the sirens, they're beautiful, but they're also dangerous. You know, I'm lured in by the beauty of the wilderness, and once I get there, I'm undergoing sometimes some harsh trails, some harsh trials. You know, rock faces and unexpected weather conditions, and so it can become very, very serious, very fast, and sometimes even on recreational hikes, wondering, how did I get into this? What am I doing, right? So this adventure deepens into a journey of darkness and fear, but it's because we peeled away the outer levels and we're getting into more of our inner stuff that was simply hidden before, okay? The next step here, Campbell calls atonement with the Father, at 1 mint. We can kind of feel like, why am I being punished? Why is this happening to me? We tend to want justice and wrath for others, right? Reflexive of our own ego. We want mercy and grace for ourselves. But that requires faith. And it requires abandoning the ego. Once we do that, we can start to grow and understand that there's a plan. The best illustration of this is the myth of Thor. In the movie, Thor is powerful. He's about to become, you know, king, successor to Odin, but Thor is still infantile. Thor is a hothead, and Odin banishes him, but with a plan. And Thor, through struggling through the things he does, becomes divested of the infantile and inappropriate, and becomes back a changed and much wiser person, one who's ready to be the successor of Odin. And this is the process with the Father, understanding that the terrible otherness crises of the Father are in fact for a reason, and they're to teach us. If we don't have that, we go off and we make terrible mistakes. You know, like when Phoebus' son asks for a boon and he wants to take the chariot off. He's not ready, and it turns into disaster. Okay, the Father's cruelty, so to speak, is getting us ready for that next step. Okay, we have to go into these things at a level we've done. But once we have seen this, we are blissfully aware of total presence. The apotheosis. We understand the majesty of being. Certainly we understand the wonderful spiritual boons and grace that are given to us. But now we understand that tragedy and trial and hardship is part of the majesty of being, in the same way that we appreciate the totality of nature. Time and eternity are two aspects of the same experience. Our fall from perfection is one and two duality of good and bad, tree of knowledge of good and evil. So death is not the end, but it's a second birth. It's like goddess meets atonement with the Father, and we understand a much more rich being, and we understand presence, okay? And we start to become aware. This is the point when Bodhisattva Kuan Yin is about to step into nirvana and understands that this is pointless, that if achieving nirvana for oneself, enlightenment for oneself, is not a worthwhile goal, and instead works for the enlightenment of all beings. Only this is important. This is that kind of transcendence of ego and self that is important for awareness. Okay, so we come back from this journey with a spiritual boon, with gifts. They are stepped down to the level that we're at and can understand. And it's an ongoing process. And each time we go in more deeper. And crossing the threshold back. Okay, this is an important step as well. Understanding how we live in the ordinary world now that we've had that. That presents its own special challenges. These are all things we'll be talking about in the Reconnective Journey. I hope you'll join us. You'll always be different. Seriously, join us.